When we first heard about this wide-angle lens that went on the market, it raised a few questions for us to really dive in and figure out how practical is it for the Sony ZV-1. The first question I had is there really any need for a wide-angle lens on the ZV-1 unless you're doing some type of vlogging with it? How exactly does it attach to the lens? How wide does it go? Does it negatively affect the image resolution? How about the autofocus? Is the autofocus still just as fast? Can I still use my ZV-1 on a gimbal, or is it too out of balance with this heavier lens on the end? What about the macro lens that comes with this wide-angle lens? In this video, we're gonna cover all of that. A couple of months ago, I heard about a wide-angle lens that hit the marketplace specifically made for the Sony ZV-1. As soon as I heard about it, I had to get my hands on one because I had a bunch of questions that I had to get to the bottom of. I put out a post to let you guys know that I picked one of these up and asked you what you would like me to review about it. So I combined my questions with your questions, and in this video, we're gonna cover all of that. To start off, let's get our facts straight. The Sony ZV-1 out of the box comes with a 24 to 70 millimeter Zeiss lens attached to the body. However, when you turn on the active stabilization, the ZV-1 crops in, so you're really looking at 30 millimeters as far as how wide the ZV-1 actually goes. Now, if you were to put the ZV-1 on a tripod for like a landscape shot, then yes, you could leave the stabilization off and you are set with your 24 millimeters. But most of us move around with our camera and we're trying to get some of those cool camera moves, so we have to activate the active stabilization. Therein lies the problem or the limitation with the Sony ZV-1. Because once you activate active stabilization and you try to vlog with it, or you try to get into a tight space, you're really dealing with a 30 millimeter lens. This is the vlog style setup with the Sony ZV-1. I have the active stabilization set, which means I'm really at about 30 millimeters, and I don't have the wide angle lens on at this point. This is me vlogging in a handheld style with the active stabilization set, which means I'm really at about 24 millimeters on the ZV-1, and I have the wide angle lens on the camera. Now, most of us don't vlog, and we use the Sony ZV-1 as a means to make cool videos. But you never know when you might need a wide-angle lens, whether you're doing like a landscape shot or a real estate video where you're in like a tight space like this one. There's been many times where I've been on some type of set and I wanted to get a wider view of whatever I might be shooting, and this does not include vlogging. So there's always a good use to have a wide angle lens even if you don't vlog. So that's why this wide angle lens is nice, because it really takes you back down to that 24 millimeters while you're in active stabilization with the ZV-1. And it gives you the ability to get into some of those more tight spaces, and we're able to use that 24 millimeters that Sony advertised. Now let's talk about how you actually attach it to the ZV-1. This little lens breaks down into 3 different parts. The first part is like a step-up ring that attaches to the ZV-1 using a little adhesive. Then you have the macro lens portion of the lens, and then you have the wide-angle lens, which attaches to the macro portion. Once you attach all 3 of those together, you got yourself a nice wide-angle lens. So it's pretty easy, and I like how when you shut the ZV-1, the step-up ring doesn't cross the base of the ZV-1, so you can actually leave it attached if you want in your camera bag. Now, a concern people have had about this particular lens is that it's too heavy and it's gonna hurt the motors of the ZV-1. Well, this lens comes in at about 238 grams, and the ZV-1 is 294. So my recommendation is to take the lens off, turn the ZV-1 on, and then put the lens on. That way you don't hurt the motors as the lens retracts in and out. So that's how it attaches. We already talked about how wide the lens is when you put it on the ZV-1. Now let's see how it affects the image quality as far as resolution and if it gives it that fisheye effect. Now, in order to get my millimeters right, I'm gonna use the Tamron 17-28 on my A7 III and put that camera right above the ZV-1 with this wide angle lens made by Ulanzi on the bottom, so that we can really make sure that we're comparing millimeter to millimeter. In order to do this, I'm gonna do a couple different camera moves like we learned from the camera move video. We're gonna do a pan, a tilt, a truck or a tracking shot, a still shot, and even a dolly forward. This way we can actually see what's happening on the outside of the image once the camera's in motion. So right now I'm using the wide angle lens on the Sony ZV-1. I actually turned the image stabilization off because I wanted to get a true 18mm wide angle image out of the ZV-1 so that you guys could have a look to see what it looks like when you're on a tripod. So this is what it looks like when the wide angle lens is off of the ZV-1 and the ZV-1 is pushed back to a true 24mm because we are on a tripod. Now, a lot of people have asked me if you could put an ND filter on this wide angle lens. I haven't been able to find anything online that would allow me to do that, but if you know about that, please let me know in the comments so I could purchase those ND filters and try them out with this wide angle lens. Because a lot of times the ND filter that's inside the ZV-1 is just not enough to beat out that bright sun. So now we're gonna try to balance the ZV-1 on the gimbal to see if it can actually balance out right. The max payload on the gimbal is 720 grams. The ZV-1 is 294 grams and the lens is 238. I don't know what 294 plus 238 is, but I know that it's well below 720, so we should be good with the gimbal. Let's try to balance this thing out. So I was able to throw this setup onto the gimbal, although it was difficult because I had to take the arms and push them all the way to their outside in order to make sure it was balanced. I think it's because the center of gravity was hard to find in here, but either way, I was able to do it. So as far as getting this thing on a gimbal, we're all set. Let's go get some shots so we can check out the image quality. Another good thing about having a gimbal when you're using this wide angle lens on the ZV-1 is that you can turn the stabilization to standard and you can get a true 18mm out of the ZV-1 lens, just like so. Now I'm gonna take the camera off the gimbal, I'm gonna turn active stabilization back on, and I'm gonna take the wide angle lens off. So now we're dealing with a little bit more of a crop and also no wide angle lens so that we can get a good idea of the difference between a wide angle lens on the ZV-1 and the ZV-1 without the lens on it. One thing that I do like about the little bit of extra weight that this lens provides is that it makes for smoother camera movement when it's on the gimbal. Light cameras don't really move that smoothly, so when I put this weight on it, it helps me get that nice smooth footage. So let's see what this looks like when I go along the edge of the boat to see the corners of the image to see if we have any type of warping going on. I'm shooting this in Cine 2, which is picture profile 6, and I'm gonna shoot it at 60 frames per second so I can slow it down in post. Now we're gonna do a tracking shot or like a horizontal slider shot, and we're gonna really look at the outside of the image to see if there's any funny warping going on when we go from left to right. So I'm gonna switch the gimbal to lock. We're still shooting in 60 frames per second so I can slow it down later in post. And I'm just gonna slide across the top of this boat. There's a software out there called Catalyst that I've seen a lot of other YouTubers talk about, where you can actually import your footage using a Sony ZV-1 camera or some of these newer Sony cameras, and it super stabilizes your footage. However, when I tried downloading it and trying to upload my footage, stabilizing it, and then exporting it, it took a really long time. So my best advice to any of you guys is to just get your footage right in camera, put it on a gimbal, or use the active stabilization. That way you don't have to worry about all of that stabilization third-party software. All right, let's go take a look at this footage and see what we come up with. So I didn't see any type of image fall off. I think that the image quality is just as good if the lens wasn't on there. So we're set as far as image quality goes and the resolution of the image straight out of the ZV-1. As far as the sides of the image, I do see a little warping, but it's very difficult to see, and unless you're like us, you don't notice that. So if you're doing it for a client, no one would notice it. Also, it's so small and it's so hard to see, I think it's okay. Every single wide angle lens that I've ever used on any camera has that effect. So it's something that we just come to expect. But other than that, I think the image quality and that little fisheye concern that I had is not there. So far, this wide angle lens is good to go. Now I want to take a look at the autofocus capabilities to see if the lens affects the speed of the autofocus on the ZV-1. Let's take a look. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't see any difference in speed when it comes to autofocus between the wide angle lens and the ZV-1. Maybe if I was in different lighting environments, I would have a different result. But for now, I think it's just fine. Now that the sun is setting, let's go see what the golden hour looks like when the sun hits this lens. So, nothing special about the sun refraction when it hits this lens. I did see some pretty cool details in the flare. Speaking about details, let's take a look at this macro lens and see if it can beat out my 50mm. So I'm trying to think about what type of shots we got with that one macro video where I flipped the lens around, but I can't remember any of the shots. Oh, there's a cat. Let's go get the cat. All right, let's not do that shot. The first thing that I could think of is that little clover shot where we put some water on top of it and then the water dripped off of it. So I want to see if I can make that happen again. I'm going to turn the ZV-1 to 120 frames per second. And I'm just gonna go program auto so I don't have to worry about the exposure. So let's see how close this thing can get. All right. So for this final test with this little macro lens, I found this garden full of weed flowers, and I'm gonna pull one of those out, put it in the ground, and see what kind of shot we get with that. Judge, you let me know which one you thought was better, my 50mm lens that I flipped around with the lens cover or this macro lens. I have a serious deep-rooted pride when it comes to that macro video because I was so excited about it. But if you guys like this one better, let me know in the comments below. My conclusion to this lens is that it's good. I'd be confident to use it on a client shoot. I wouldn't be nervous about it ruining my image or messing it up. I don't think it's going to affect the motors as long as you put the lens on as soon as you turn the ZV-1 on and then take it off once you turn it off. And I also like how this step-up ring can kind of stay on the lens even when you have it turned off, almost like an extra protection. If you guys want to pick one of these up, I'll leave a link in the description. Let me know what you think about this wide angle lens. Until the next video, I'm Joe with PotterMade, and let's grow as we go. Peace. Oh, I'm supposed to put this on after I turn it on.